I spent 3 years building the financial model that would bring in the biggest contract in company history. 3 years of weekend work sessions while my colleagues were at hockey games. 3 years proving I belonged in that boardroom. Then, Todd announced the international partnership during our quarterly meeting. Everyone clapped, but when he said my name as lead consultant, the room went silent. Margaret from accounting whispered something to James. He smirked, and Todd continued talking, but I saw it. The look they exchanged. The one that said, "Really? Him?" 20 people in that conference room, and I felt completely alone. That afternoon, Margaret stopped me near the elevators. She spoke loud enough for others to hear. She said the international clients were conservative, traditional. She said maybe someone else should take the lead, someone more appropriate. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside without responding. I arrived at Northbridge Capital Group believing competence mattered more than anything else. I had my CPA, my MBA from McGill, my decade of experience. But within 2 weeks, I noticed the lunch invitations that never came. The inside jokes I was never part of. During my first major presentation, Derek interrupted me 3 times to explain basic concepts I had already covered. Nobody corrected him. One detail: ever felt judged just for being who you are, or know someone who has gone through this? This story will touch you, and you'll want to follow it to the end. Subscribe and help give voice to stories that should no longer remain silent. My desk was in the corner of the open floor plan at Northbridge Capital Group. The Toronto skyline stretched beyond the windows, all glass and steel reflecting Lake Ontario. I had worked there for 3 years. My job was senior financial consultant. I analyzed corporate acquisitions, built financial models, advised on mergers. Every morning started the same way. I arrived at 7:30. The office was still quiet. I made coffee in the break room and reviewed overnight market reports. By 8, the floor filled with voices. My colleagues talked about hockey scores, their kids' weekend plans. I listened from my corner. Sometimes I contributed a comment. The conversation usually died after I spoke. Derek sat 3 desks away. He had joined the firm 6 months after me, but got promoted to associate director within a year. He was loud, confident. He wore expensive suits and talked about his cottage in Muskoka. During meetings, he interrupted people constantly. When he interrupted me, nobody said anything. When I tried to finish my point, Todd would say we needed to move on. Margaret worked in accounting. She had been at Northbridge for 15 years. She knew everyone, organized the office social events, the annual summer barbecue, the Christmas party at some expensive restaurant in Yorkville. She always sent group emails about these events. My name was on the distribution list, but when I showed up, conversations shifted. People found reasons to walk away. I spent most lunches at my desk. I told myself I preferred it. I could work through the noon hour, get ahead on projects. The truth was simpler. The lunch groups were already formed. They had their regular spots. The sushi place on King Street, the sandwich shop near Union Station, nobody invited me along. James was different. At first, he started at Northbridge, around the same time as me. We were both new, both trying to prove ourselves. We sometimes grabbed coffee together. He complained about Todd's demanding schedule. I listened. Then, one Monday, James stopped by my desk. Cool. He had met someone over the weekend. A woman named Rachel. He showed me photos on his phone. They were at some bar in the Distillery District. He talked about her for 20 minutes. The next week, I mentioned I had gone to a concert. James asked if I went alone. I said no, I went with someone. He asked who. I said a friend. He pressed for details. I kept it vague. After that conversation, James stopped coming by my desk. He joined Derek's lunch group instead. The microaggressions were constant but subtle. During presentations, colleagues directed questions to Derek even when I was presenting. In emails, people copied Derek but left me off threads about projects I was leading. At the holiday party, Margaret organized a gift exchange. Everyone got thoughtful presents based on their interests. I received a generic Starbucks gift card. I never talked about my personal life at work. I learned early that silence was safer. When colleagues asked about my weekend, I kept answers brief. I went to the gym. I caught up on work. I visited my parents in Ottawa. All true, all incomplete. My parents knew I was gay. I told them when I was 25. My mother cried. My father said nothing for 3 days. Eventually, we reached an unspoken agreement. We never discussed it. I was their son. They loved me. But at family dinners, when my sister brought her husband, when my brother talked about his girlfriend, I stayed quiet about my own life. Then I met Adrian at a professional networking event. He worked in tech, ran a successful software company. We started talking near the bar. The conversation was easy, natural. He made me laugh. We exchanged numbers. 3 weeks later, we went for dinner in Little Italy. He held my hand across the table. Cupping. I pulled away instinctively, checking if anyone was watching. He noticed but did not say anything. Adrian and I started dating seriously. He lived in a condo near the waterfront. On weekends, we cooked together, watched movies, talked for hours. He was open about who he was. His family knew. His employees knew. His social media had photos of us together. I asked him to untag me. He looked hurt, but agreed. At work, I became even more careful. I deleted social media apps from my phone during office hours. I never mentioned Adrian by name. When colleagues asked about my weekend, I said I had been busy with personal projects. They stopped asking eventually. The Westbridge International deal started as a rumor. People whispered about it near the coffee machine. A massive European conglomerate wanted to expand into the Canadian market. They needed local expertise, financial analysis, regulatory guidance. The contract was worth hundreds of millions. Whoever led the project would become a legend at Northbridge. Todd announced it officially during a quarterly meeting. He explained the scope, the timeline, the stakes. This was our chance to become a top-tier firm. Every senior consultant would be evaluated for the lead position. It would require international travel, client dinners, weekend strategy sessions. The person selected would work directly with Westbridge executives. Kinda wanted it desperately. I had spent 3 years preparing for an opportunity like this. I knew European financial regulations. I had studied international tax law. I had built the models, run the scenarios, prepared the presentations. This was my moment. I spent the next month working 18-hour days. I created detailed financial projections. I analyzed market entry strategies. I prepared risk assessments. Every night, I stayed late at the office. The cleaning staff knew me by name. I brought dinner from the Thai place downstairs and ate at my desk while reviewing spreadsheets. Adrian noticed my absence. He texted asking when we could see each other. I responded with apologies, promises. To make time soon, he was patient, understanding, but I could sense his frustration. We had been together 6 months. He wanted more than stolen hours and canceled plans. One Saturday, I skipped our brunch plans to finish a presentation. Adrian called me that afternoon. He said we needed to talk about priorities. I told him this project was temporary. After I got the lead position, things would calm down. He asked if I was sure about that. I said yes, absolutely. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said he hoped I was right. The selection process took 6 weeks. Todd interviewed every senior consultant individually. When my turn came, I brought printed copies of my analysis, called him through my strategy, my timeline, my contingency. Todd nodded, took notes, asked detailed questions. At the end, he said I had done impressive work. He would make his decision soon. 2 weeks later, Todd called an emergency meeting. Everyone gathered in the main conference room. The energy was tense, expectant. Todd stood at the head of the table. He talked about the importance of this project. He said he had chosen the best person for the job. Then he said, my name, Cameron Mitchell. The room erupted in applause, but it felt hollow, obligatory. I looked around. Margaret was whispering to James. Derek was staring at his phone. Only a few people met my eyes, and their smiles did not reach their faces. After the meeting, colleagues offered stiff congratulations. They shook my hand, said, good luck. Nobody suggested celebrating. Nobody invited me for drinks. I returned to my desk and opened my laptop. My phone buzzed. Adrian had sent a message. Proud of me. He wanted to take me to dinner. I told him I would be working late, but we could meet tomorrow. He sent back a simple, okay. That evening, Margaret approached my desk. The office was nearly empty. She stood there for a moment, then asked if we could talk. I said sure. She sat in the chair beside my desk. She spoke carefully, choosing her words. She said the Westbridge executives were very traditional. They came from conservative backgrounds. Presentation mattered in international business. She asked if I had thought about how I would present myself. I asked what she meant. She said I knew what she meant. Someone more conventional might be better suited for client-facing. Work, someone the executives could relate to more easily. I felt my face get hot. I asked if Todd knew she was having this conversation. She said she was just offering friendly advice. Then she stood up and walked away. I sat there staring at my computer screen. The spreadsheet blurred. My hands were shaking. The Westbridge project officially launched the following Monday. Todd scheduled a kickoff meeting with the full team. I presented the initial strategy. I outlined our approach to market analysis, regulatory compliance, financial structuring. Derek interrupted twice to suggest modifications to my plan. His suggestions were basic, things I had already incorporated. I pointed this out politely. Todd said we should consider all perspectives. After the meeting, I asked Todd if we could speak privately. In his office, I mentioned Margaret's comments. Todd looked uncomfortable. He said Margaret was probably just nervous about such a high-stakes project. He told me not to worry. I had earned this opportunity. My work spoke for itself. I wanted to believe him. The next few weeks were intense. I coordinated with Westbridge executives across 6 time zones. I joined video calls at midnight, woke up at 5 a.m. for European morning meetings. I reviewed hundreds of pages of financial documents. I built models projecting revenue growth, cost structures, market penetration rates. Adrian and I barely saw each other. When we did, I was exhausted. I fell asleep during movies. I canceled dinner plans. One evening, he asked me point blank if this relationship was a priority for me. I said of course it was. He said it did not feel that way. Promised things would get better after the initial phase of the project. He nodded but looked unconvinced. At work, tensions escalated. Derek started questioning my decisions in team meetings. He would ask why I chose certain approaches, suggest alternatives that made no sense. Other colleagues began piling on. James questioned my market research. Margaret raised concerns about my timeline. It felt coordinated, deliberate. Todd noticed but did nothing. In fact, he started inviting Derek to client calls. I was supposed to lead. He said it was good to have multiple perspectives. But Derek used those calls to undermine me. He would apologize to clients for any confusion, then re-explain concepts I had just covered. The Westbridge executives started directing questions to him instead of me. One Thursday, Adrian surprised me at the office. He brought dinner from my favorite Indian restaurant. We ate in the conference room. He asked how the project was going. I told him it was challenging. He asked if it was worth sacrificing everything else. I got defensive. I said I was building my career. He said he understood ambition, but at what cost? We argued. I said he did not understand the pressure I was under. He said maybe I was right. Maybe he did not understand why I was killing myself for people who clearly did not respect me. That hurt because it was true. I had noticed the pattern. My emails went unanswered. My meeting invitations were declined. When I walked into rooms, conversations stopped. The lunch invitations never came. I was leading the biggest project in company history, and I was more isolated than ever. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Adrian's software company had developed proprietary data analytics tools during one of our rare dinners together. He mentioned his company was expanding into financial services. Console Daywork. They were looking for partners in the Canadian market. I asked him more about it. He explained they had contracts with several major European firms, including one that sounded familiar. I asked which one. He said Westbridge International. They were one of his biggest clients. I sat back in my chair. My mind was racing. I asked Adrian how long he had been working with Westbridge. He said 2 years. They used his software for operational analytics. He had met with their executives multiple times. He knew their VP of operations personally. I asked if he would be willing to introduce me. He looked at me carefully. He said yes, but only if I was ready to have an honest conversation first. That night, we talked for hours. Adrian said he was tired of being my secret. He understood workplace discretion, but this was different. I was hiding our entire relationship. I never posted photos. I never mentioned him. His friends knew about me, but mine did not even know he existed. He said if I wanted his help with Westbridge, I needed to make a choice. Be honest about who I was, or keep living in fear. He could not be with someone who treated their relationship like something shameful. I told him I was scared. Scared of losing my career, my reputation, the respect I had fought so hard to earn. Adrian said I needed to respect myself first. The right people would follow. The wrong people were not worth my time. I knew he was right. I had spent years hiding, compromising, shrinking myself to fit into spaces that would never truly accept me. I was exhausted. The next morning, I asked Adrian to set up a meeting. With his contact at Westbridge, he made a call. 2 days later, I had a video conference scheduled with Richard Peterson, VP of Operations at Westbridge International. Adrian joined the call to make introductions. Richard was warm, professional. He asked about my background, my experience with the project. I was honest. I explained my role at Northbridge. I outlined my strategy for their Canadian expansion. I mentioned some concerns about execution. Richard listened carefully. He said he had noticed some inconsistencies in recent communications from Northbridge. Different people were giving him different information. He asked if there were internal challenges. I chose my words carefully. I said there were differing opinions on strategy. He appreciated my honesty. He asked if I would be willing to send him my original analysis directly. I said yes. That weekend, I compiled everything. Every model, every projection, every strategic recommendation. I sent it directly to Richard with a detailed explanation. Monday morning, he responded. He said my work was exactly what Westbridge needed. He wanted to set up a call with their executive team. He asked if I could present my strategy to them directly. I said absolutely. I did not tell Todd about the communication. I should have, but something stopped me. Maybe it was Margaret's comments. Maybe it was Derek's constant undermining. Maybe it was the isolation, the whispers, the feeling that I was fighting alone. I scheduled the presentation for the following Thursday. The presentation went perfectly. Richard and 4 other Westbridge executives joined the call. I walked them through the entire strategy. I answered every question. I addressed every concern. At the end, Richard thanked me. He said this was the level of expertise they expected from Northbridge. One of the other executives asked if I would be their primary contact moving forward. I said that was my understanding. Yes. That afternoon, Todd called me into his office. He was furious. He asked why I had gone directly to the client without telling him. I explained that Richard had requested additional information. Todd said that should have gone through him. He said I had violated protocol. I pointed out that I was the project lead. He said not anymore. He was reassigning me to a supporting role. Derek would take over as lead consultant. I asked why. Todd said the client relationship needed someone with better judgment, someone who understood professional boundaries. I felt the room tilt. This was my project. My strategy caught my 3 years of work. I asked if this was really about protocol or about something else. Todd's face hardened. He said I was being paranoid. I asked if Margaret had spoken to him about me. He said this conversation was over. I was off the lead. Role effective immediately. I went back to my desk in shock. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen. 3 years. All of it for nothing. Derek walked by and smirked. He said, "Better luck next time." I did not respond. The transition happened fast. By the end of the week, Derek had taken over all client communications. He scheduled new meetings with Westbridge. He revised my strategy documents, putting his name as primary author. My name was moved to a footnote in the acknowledgments section. I was reassigned to background research and data compilation, support work, assistant-level tasks. I worked from home the following Monday. I could not face the office. I lay in bed until noon. Adrian came over in the afternoon. He found me still in pajamas, staring at my laptop. He sat beside me. He did not say anything at first, he just held my hand. Finally, I told him everything. The demotion, the reassignment, the way they had erased me from my own project. I told him I felt like I was disappearing, like 3 years of my life meant nothing. Adrian listened. Then he asked what I was going to do about it. I said there was nothing I could do. Todd had made his decision. Adrian said that was not the question he asked. He asked what I was going to do. I looked at him. He reminded me that I had direct contact with Richard at Westbridge. I had sent them my complete strategy. They knew my work. Did Northbridge know that? I said no. I had never mentioned it to Todd. Adrian smiled. He said maybe I should keep it that way. Over the next 2 weeks, I quietly maintained my relationship with Richard. We exchanged emails. He asked clarifying questions about the strategy. I provided detailed answers. He mentioned that Derek's presentations seemed less comprehensive than what I had originally sent. I did not comment. I just kept providing good information. Richard appreciated it. He started copying me on emails to Todd, specifically requesting my input. Todd was not happy about this. He called me into his office again. He asked why the client kept asking for me specifically. I said I had built a good rapport during my time as lead. He told me to direct all client inquiries to Derek. I said I would follow proper channels. But Richard kept emailing me directly, and I kept responding. My relationship with Adrian was also shifting. The crisis had forced honesty between us. I stopped hiding our relationship. I changed my social media privacy settings. I posted a photo of us together. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Some old friends from university liked it. Others unfollowed me. I did not care anymore. I was done pretending. At the office, Derek was struggling. The Westbridge executives were not responding well to his presentations. He did not understand their priorities. He could not answer their technical questions. Richard started expressing concerns to Todd. Progress was slowing. Decisions were being delayed. Todd tried to smooth things over, but the problems kept mounting. Then came the trip to Amsterdam. Westbridge had scheduled an in-person meeting with their executive board. It was crucial. Final decisions on the Canadian expansion would be made. Todd decided to send Derek and Margaret. I was not invited. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday. On Monday afternoon, Richard sent me a personal email. He said the executive board specifically requested my presence. He asked if I could fly to Amsterdam. I forwarded the email to Todd. Todd called me immediately. He asked what this was about. I said the client wanted me there. He said it was inappropriate for me to have direct communication with them. I reminded him that Richard had been copying me on official emails for weeks. Todd was silent. Then he said, fine, I could go, but I would be there in a support capacity only. Derek was still lead. I said I understood. I booked a flight that evening. The flight was long. I had too much time to think. I thought about the last 3 years. The isolation, the microaggressions, the constant need to prove myself. I thought about Margaret's comment about being appropriate, about Derek's smirks, about Todd's disappointed looks. I thought about Adrian's question. What was I going to do about it? I knew now. I was going to stop letting them write my story. We arrived in Amsterdam on Tuesday morning. The Westbridge offices were in a modern building near the financial district. Pritchard met us in the lobby. He greeted Derek and Margaret politely. Then he turned to me. He shook my hand warmly. He said he was glad I could make it. The executive board was looking forward to my presentation. Derek looked confused. He said he was doing the presentation. Richard smiled. He said there had been a change of plans. The board wanted to hear directly from me. The meeting started at 10. 8 Westbridge executives sat around a massive conference table. Pritchard made introductions. Then he invited me to present. I walked him through the complete strategy, market analysis, financial projections, regulatory compliance, risk management, implementation timeline. I had prepared for 3 years. I knew every detail, every number, every potential concern. The presentation lasted 90 minutes. Not one person interrupted me. When I finished, the CEO asked questions. He wanted to know about specific tax implications, about partnership structures, about timeline flexibility. I answered everything. Derek tried to interject once. Richard politely asked him to wait. After another 30 minutes of discussion, the CEO thanked me. He said this was exactly the level of expertise they needed. He looked at Todd. He said Northbridge clearly had exceptional talent. Todd nodded, looking uncomfortable. During the lunch break, Richard pulled me aside. He said the board was impressed. Very impressed. Kinda getting he asked if I would be willing to discuss something sensitive. I said of course. He asked if I would be interested in leading this project independently, not through Northbridge, directly with Westbridge. I asked what he meant. He explained that his company valued relationships, expertise, and integrity above all else. They had concerns about Northbridge's internal organization, but they trusted me personally. AI was willing to set up my own consulting firm. They would contract directly with me. The deal was worth $80 million over 3 years. I stood there in the Westbridge cafeteria looking out at the Amsterdam canals. Everything I had worked for was being offered to me, not through the people who had diminished me, but in spite of them. I asked Richard why he was offering this. He said because Adrian had told him months ago that I was the smartest consultant he had ever worked with. Yes, and after working with me directly, Richard agreed. Also, Richard added, his husband worked in corporate consulting too. He understood what it was like to be underestimated. He knew talent when he saw it, and he did not waste time with people who could not recognize it. I told Richard I needed to think about it. He said to take the afternoon, we could discuss details over dinner. I returned to the conference room. The afternoon session was awkward. Derek tried to reassert control. But every time he spoke, the Westbridge executives looked bored. They asked me follow-up questions. They wanted my opinion. By the end of the day, it was clear who they respected. That evening, I had dinner with Richard and 2 other Westbridge board members. We discussed the proposal in detail. They would provide an initial retainer. I would set up my own firm. They would be my primary client. Other European companies in their network would likely follow. It was an extraordinary opportunity. It was also terrifying. I would be leaving the security of Northbridge. I would be going out on my own, but I would be free. I accepted. We formalized everything that night. Contracts were drawn up. Signatures were obtained. By midnight, I had $80 million in guaranteed consulting fees. I had my own company, and Northbridge had just lost their biggest client. I flew back to Toronto the next morning. Derek and Margaret were on the same flight. Coded they did not know yet. Nobody did. I did not go into the Northbridge office on Thursday. I called in sick. I spent the day setting up my new company, Mitchell Advisory Group. I registered the business. I opened bank accounts. I contacted lawyers. About contracts, by Friday afternoon, everything was in place. I sent Todd an email. I attached my resignation letter and the signed contract with Westbridge. I explained that I would be consulting independently moving forward. I thanked him for the opportunity to work at Northbridge. Then I copied Richard on the email and sent it. Todd called me immediately. He was shouting. He asked what I had done. I said I had accepted a better opportunity. He said I had stolen their client. I corrected him. Westbridge had requested to work with me directly. They had made that choice. Todd threatened legal action. I reminded him that my employment contract had no non-compete clause. I had checked with lawyers.
What is legal?
He hung up on me. Over the weekend, the news spread through Northbridge. Colleagues started messaging me. Some were congratulatory. Most were shocked. Derek sent an angry text accusing me of sabotage. I did not respond. Margaret sent nothing. On Monday morning, I received an email from Northbridge's legal team. They wanted to schedule a meeting. I forwarded it to my lawyer. He handled it. Adrian was proud. He took me to dinner at Canoe, the fancy restaurant on the 54th floor overlooking the city. We toasted 2 new beginnings. He said he knew I had it in me. I said I could not have done it without him. He squeezed my hand. He said we were partners now, in everything. I felt lighter than I had in years. The fallout at Northbridge was severe. Losing Westbridge meant losing their biggest contract. Their quarterly earnings would take a massive hit. Shareholders started asking questions. Todd was called before the board. He tried to blame me. He said I had acted unethically, but Richard sent a letter to the board explaining the situation. He detailed the internal conflicts at Northbridge. He mentioned concerns about discriminatory behavior. He made it clear that Westbridge had lost confidence in the firm's leadership, not their consultants. The board was not pleased with Todd. 2 weeks later, Margaret was let go. The company needed to make cuts. She had been there 15 years, but seniority did not save her. Derek was demoted back to senior consultant. His promised partnership was revoked. He left the firm 3 months later. James stayed but was moved to a different department. Todd survived, but his reputation was damaged. The board brought in new management. They wanted to rebuild the company culture. Meanwhile, my business was thriving. Westbridge introduced me to 3 other European companies looking for Canadian market expertise. Within 6 months, I had 5 major clients. I hired 2 junior consultants to help with the workload. We rented office space in the financial district, not far from Northbridge, actually. Sometimes I saw former colleagues on the street. Most avoided eye contact. A few stopped to congratulate me. The story reached the business press. Profile in the Globe and Mail described my rapid success. The article mentioned that I had left Northbridge after being sidelined on the Westbridge project. It quoted anonymous sources describing a toxic work environment. The Northbridge's recruiting efforts suffered. Top talent started declining their offers. The company that had once been prestigious was now struggling to attract qualified people. I did not celebrate their downfall publicly. I did not need to. My success was statement enough. Adrian and I moved into a bigger place together, a townhouse in Leslieville with a backyard. We hosted dinners for friends. We went to pride events. We stopped hiding. My parents came to visit. They met Adrian. My mother hugged him. My father shook his hand. It was not perfect, but it was progress. One evening, about a year after I left Northbridge, I received a LinkedIn message. It was from a young consultant at another firm. He said he had read about my story. He wanted advice. He said he was gay and struggling in his office. He felt invisible. He asked how I had found the courage to bet on myself. I thought about it. Then I wrote back. I told him that courage was not the absence of fear. It was deciding that your own respect mattered more than their approval. I told him to document everything, to build relationships based on competence and character, to never let anyone make him feel small. I told him the right opportunities would come, but he had to be ready to recognize them and brave enough to take them. He thanked me. He said it helped. 6 months later, he left his firm and started working for one of my clients. He was talented, capable. He reminded me of myself at that age. Except he would not have to waste 3 years proving his worth to people who would never see it. The world was changing. Slowly, painfully, but it was changing. The ultimate vindication came 18 months after leaving Northbridge. Westbridge announced a major expansion across North America. They were investing billions in new markets. Richard called to tell me personally Mitchell Advisory Group would be their exclusive consultant for the entire operation. The contract was worth over $200 million over 5 years. It was the largest consulting deal in Canadian history, and it had my name on it. Not Derek's. Cod, not Todd's mine. I was invited to speak at business conferences. Universities asked me to lecture. Young professionals sought mentorship. I always said yes. I told them about the isolation, the microaggressions, the doubt. But I also told them about resilience, about strategy, about knowing your worth even when others refused to see it. I told them that being underestimated was sometimes an advantage. People revealed their true selves when they thought you were not a threat. Proved them wrong. The victory was absolute. Northbridge never recovered its previous status. They lost more clients. Key employees left. The firm was eventually acquired by a larger company. Todd was pushed out during the merger. I heard through mutual contacts that he struggled to find another executive position. His reputation had been damaged. Margaret opened a small accounting practice. Derek moved to Calgary for a job at a mid-tier firm. Their careers continued, but never reached the heights they had anticipated. Meanwhile, Mitchell Advisory Group became one of the most respected consulting firms in Canada. I think about that afternoon in the Northbridge elevator a lot when Margaret told me I was not appropriate. When I felt completely alone, I remember wanting to disappear, to quit, to accept that maybe they were right. Maybe I did not belong in those spaces. But I am glad I stayed. Not for them. For myself. Because I learned that their limitations were not mine. Their prejudice was their weakness, not my problem. And their inability to see my values said everything about them and nothing about me. Now, when I walk into boardrooms, I do not wonder if I belong. I know I do because I built this not despite who I am, but with every part of who I am. The struggle made me sharper. The isolation made me strategic. The doubt made me prove myself so thoroughly that nobody could question my competence. They tried to erase me from my own story. Instead, I wrote a better one. One where I did not need their permission to succeed. I just needed my own courage. And the right people who could actually see me. That was enough. It was always enough.